Christine Lindsay Walters was 23 years old in the fall of 2008, and by all accounts, she embraced life with open arms. Born on August 8, 1985, and raised in Deerfield, Wisconsin, she'd grown into a warm, curious, and independent young woman. She was a junior at the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, studying botany and ethnobotany. Outside coursework, she worked on an organic farm near campus, taught yoga and Pilates classes, and radiated the kind of energy that drew people to her. In July 2008, Christine traveled to Portland, Oregon, to visit friends during summer break. She'd planned to stay 3 weeks and return for the fall semester, but the West Coast captivated her. She fell in love with the closeness to nature, the freedom, and the alternative communities that seemed to share her values. She extended her stay, eventually connecting with self-described spiritual environmentalists, and before long, she'd made her way south to Humboldt County in California. This was a decision that would change everything as she became fully entangled in this region that has a rather sinister reputation. Humboldt County sits along the northern California coast, roughly 300 miles north of San Francisco. It's a region of towering redwood forests, rugged coastline, and small towns like Eureka and Arcata that have long attracted artists, students, and people seeking a simpler life. But Humboldt also forms part of the Emerald Triangle, a 3-county area encompassing Humboldt, Trinity, and Mendocino. This has historically been by far the largest weed-producing region in the country, and beneath the natural beauty and counterculture charm, there's a darker reality. The region has an unusually high rate of missing persons, and law enforcement resources are stretched thin across vast, densely forested terrain that can swallow people whole. Some locals and online sleuths have taken to calling the area the Black Hole for exactly that reason. Christine arrived in late September 2008, gravitating toward Arcata and becoming interested in spirituality, environmental activism, and off-the-grid living. Her mother, Anita Walters, would later tell the Eureka Times Standard that she believed Christine was too trusting of the people she met in California. Christine had been keeping regular phone contact with her family during her travels, but after settling in Humboldt, her calls became less frequent. When she did call, she asked her parents for money on several different occasions, with her father obliging these requests. Around November 7, 2008, Christine participated in what's commonly called a tea ceremony in the Arcata area. A private investigator later hired by her family uncovered that the ceremony involved ayahuasca, a powerful hallucinogenic brew made from South American plants. Ayahuasca's effects can include vomiting, diarrhea, and intense hallucinations lasting up to 10 hours. It's also known to trigger severe psychological reactions in predisposed individuals, including mania and depression. Around 20 people reportedly gathered for the ceremony, led by someone claiming to be a shaman. What happened to Christine during or after that ceremony remains a central mystery. She apparently stayed with other participants for several days before leaving on her own the evening of November 11th. The next morning, a couple on Tompkins Hill Road, roughly 20 miles away, found her on their doorstep. She was barely clothed, cold, hungry, and thirsty, her body covered in briar scratches and lacerations. Her feet were nearly raw, as though she'd been running barefoot through the woods for hours. She was confused and visibly terrified. The homeowners called police, and Humboldt County deputies transported Christine to a local hospital. She appeared deeply frightened and said someone was after her, but wouldn't provide specifics about what had happened. She was evasive about her injuries, claiming at one point that she'd simply walked a long way, and spoke of demons who could hear what she was saying and were trying to get her. Drug test came back negative, and because she was a legal adult who didn't wish to be detained, authorities released her. Notably, the hospital has taken serious criticism for not placing her on a psychiatric hold in response to her behavior, though she apparently wasn't deemed a hazard to herself or others. From there, she was taken to the Red Lion Hotel located in Eureka, where she would spend her final known days. From the hotel, Christine called her mother multiple times. She was paranoid and afraid, insisting that people would find her wherever she went. She told her mother she'd been to hell and back, and had seen demons while running through the woods in the days after the ceremony. Anita Walters wanted to fly to California and bring her daughter home personally, but Christine insisted she was a grown-up and could manage on her own. The plan was for her to obtain replacement identification so she could fly home, as she had lost all her documents in the aftermath of the ceremony. On November 14th, around 1 in the afternoon, Christine dropped her hotel keys at the front desk and walked out wearing pajamas and slippers. She went to a print shop in Eureka, where her mother had faxed copies of identification documents that she would need to be replaced. The owner later told investigators Christine appeared nervous and paranoid, looking over her shoulder and trying to hide her papers. She asked directions to the DMV about a mile away, then walked out. Christine Walters has never been seen or heard from again. She was reported missing on November 17, 2008. After her disappearance, Christine's belongings, including money and a large backpack borrowed from a college friend, were found at a spiritual center in Arcata. The center's owner knew Christine and said it wasn't unusual for her to leave things there while walking in the nearby Arcata Community Forest. However, this potential break in the case went nowhere, and it was never confirmed exactly when she left the backpack at the center. According to some versions of the timeline, this may indicate that she was last seen by someone in one of the communities she drifted in and out of. One of the most widely discussed explanations is that Christine may have experienced a severe psychological episode shortly before her disappearance. She had participated in that tea ceremony days before she was found injured and visibly frightened on a rural doorstep outside Arcata. Ayahuasca contains a powerful hallucinogen, and even though a drug test came back negative at the hospital, her behavior has led many to believe it triggered an acute psychotic break. Proponents of this theory suggest that Christine may have wandered away from civilization, possibly into the dense forests of the region, and succumbed to the elements. Given the rugged, heavily wooded terrain of Humboldt County, a disoriented person could easily become lost or suffer fatal injuries with little chance of being found. Another theory is that Christine may have chose to leave society and adopt a more reclusive, off-grid lifestyle. Before her disappearance, she had shown a growing interest in alternative living, spirituality, and environmental causes. However, this theory has weakened over time, given that there has been absolutely no communication between Christine and her family in almost 20 years. The final theory is that she may have been abducted or otherwise fallen victim to foul play. Notably, individuals undergoing mental health crises are at extremely high risk of meeting with violence under the best circumstances. However, Christine was far away from home, isolated from friends and family, and in a region of the country known for criminality. Because Humboldt County is part of the Emerald Triangle, some theorists argue that Christine could have fallen victim to violence or exploitation after she left the copy center. The area's reputation for high rates of missing persons has fueled speculation that locals are too afraid of the criminal elements in their midst to cooperate with the cops. Some theorists have also noted that the area may be a hotspot for serial predators looking to take advantage of the trusting nature of the free-spirited types who flock there. In the end, Christine's case has gone cold, and ultimately there's no solid evidence in any direction to indicate what actually happened to her. It sounds like a Hollywood thriller. A successful screenwriter drives off into the night and vanishes without a trace. In 1997, Gary DeVore lived that story. He was an established screenwriter known for action-packed films like Running Scared and Raw Deal, and he had worked with some of the biggest names in the industry. But DeVore is remembered today less for his hit movies and more for the eerie mystery surrounding his death. When his remains were finally discovered a year after he disappeared, the scene was stranger than fiction. His truck was found submerged in a California aqueduct, his hands were missing, and the new screenplay he'd just finished writing had vanished. Gary DeVore was a Hollywood insider, even if his name wasn't famous to the public. Born in Los Angeles in 1941, he got his start writing for TV shows in the 1960s and later made a name scripting action films through the 1980s. When he wasn't working on his own projects, he was a sought-after script doctor who polished many Hollywood screenplays behind the scenes. By 1997, 55-year-old DeVore was a well-paid veteran of the movie business. He had recently remarried and was living with his wife, Wendy, in a beachfront California home. Despite his success, he was pushing himself on an ambitious new project, a script titled The Big Steal. Unlike the light-hearted thrillers he was known for, this story was set around the 1989 invasion of Panama, and according to DeVore, would reveal explosive government secrets. DeVore had reportedly done extensive research for the screenplay, hinting that he'd uncovered the real reasons behind the Panama operation. Finishing this script became his obsession in early 1997, and it seemed like nothing could stop him. On June 27, 1997, DeVore was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, wrapping up work on The Big Steal. Late that night, he began the long drive back to his home near Santa Barbara, California, opting to travel overnight through the Mojave Desert to avoid traffic. Around 1:15 a.m. on June 28th, he called Wendy from the road. He said he was past Barstow, a desert town on his route, and that he was making good time. He sounded upbeat and alert, giving Wendy no indication of any trouble. Curiously, he didn't pinpoint his exact location, and shortly after, the call dropped. That brief conversation would be the last contact anyone had with Gary DeVore. When Gary failed to arrive home the next day, Wendy alerted the authorities, and a massive search effort began. Police, volunteers, and federal agents scoured the highways and remote desert areas, looking for any sign of his SUV. The case made national news and even appeared on America's Most Wanted, but no trace of Gary or his vehicle was found in the days and weeks that followed. With no evidence and no eyewitnesses, theories about his fate ran rampant. Some suspected he was carjacked for his fancy new SUV, with his body being dumped out in the desert. Others speculated that he had simply been abandoned in the desert and perished from exposure to the elements. Others wondered if Gary had staged his own disappearance or developed amnesia and wandered off. One of the more conspiratorial suggestions was that the CIA had secretly intercepted him due to the sensitive screenplay he was carrying. After all, he had been openly talking about government secrets he had uncovered and which were going to be revealed in fictionalized form. As summer turned to fall, hope of finding him alive faded. For a full year, the mystery lingered. A Hollywood writer had vanished into the desert without a trace. In July 1998, the mystery took a dramatic turn. A determined amateur sleuth named Douglas Crawford independently investigated Gary's disappearance. He had zeroed in on a specific spot, a bridge where the Highway 14 freeway crosses the California Aqueduct in Palmdale. Crawford went to that remote area and noticed debris that looked like pieces of a vehicle on the aqueduct's embankment. Acting on his tip, authorities dispatched a dive team to search the aqueduct. Sure enough, submerged in the water below the bridge, they found a white Ford Explorer, Gary DeVore's missing truck, with a body inside. The remains were confirmed to be Gary. A wallet in the pocket of the jeans on the body held his driver's license, leaving little doubt. However, the scene was anything but a neat resolution. Crucial items were inexplicably missing from the vehicle. Investigators noted that DeVore's laptop, which held the only copy of The Big Steal, was gone, as was the revolver he had brought along for the trip. Even more disturbing, DeVore's hands weren't attached to his body. His arms in the driver's seat ended at the wrists, and no hands were found in the vehicle. For a man who made his living writing, the condition of the remains raised immediate questions about foul play, and perhaps doubly so. Equally puzzling was how Gary's vehicle ended up in that aqueduct in the first place. The stretch of highway above it has a dividing barrier, and for the truck to go off the bridge, DeVore would have had to do some unusual things. He would have had to turn around and drive several miles in the wrong direction on the freeway, with his headlights off, to reach that spot unnoticed. No skid marks or collision damage were reported on the bridge railing, suggesting the vehicle might have entered the water without a typical crash impact. At first, officials leaned toward explaining the death as a freak accident. The Los Angeles County coroner found no obvious signs of trauma and commented that it looked like a simple car accident. But Santa Barbara detectives admitted aspects of the case were highly unusual and said they couldn't rule out foul play. The physical evidence just didn't add up to an ordinary crash. The bizarre circumstances of Gary DeVore's death soon fueled intense speculation. To many, the idea that his death was an accidental drowning seemed implausible, given the missing hands, missing revolver, and missing script. Instead, people looked to the content of The Big Steal for answers. According to those who knew him, Gary had hinted that his new script contained revelations about the invasion of Panama that certain people didn't want made public. This has led to a prevalent theory that Gary DeVore was eliminated to keep those secrets buried. In this scenario, unknown agents intercepted Gary during his drive, disposed of his hands to send a message, and stole his materials to ensure the information never got out. It's a chilling idea, essentially the plot of a spy thriller, but some aspects give it traction. In the aftermath of Gary's disappearance, his wife Wendy recalled some unsettling details that later took on new meaning. She said that in the months before he vanished, Gary had been getting phone calls from contacts in the intelligence community. He'd once instructed her that if the CIA or other agencies called, she should take a message and tell them he was unavailable. After his death, Wendy also discovered that Gary had taken a clandestine trip to Panama under the guise of scouting film locations, a trip she knew nothing about at the time. Even a former government official from the Reagan era came forward to allege that DeVore had ties to the intelligence community. None of these claims have been proven, but they added more smoke to the conspiracy fire. Of course, not everyone subscribes to the conspiracy theory. Some argue the strange evidence could still result from a freak accident, but even skeptics struggle to explain the script's disappearance and the car's impossible route. The accident explanation requires a chain of increasingly unlikely improbabilities. Officially, the authorities have closed the case, listing it as a vehicular accident with no evidence of foul play. In the absence of definitive answers, Gary DeVore's demise has secured a place in Hollywood lore as one of Hollywood's strangest cold cases. On the evening of February 11, 1976, a man calling himself Joseph Donati stepped out of a friend's apartment in San Francisco's quiet outer Sunset neighborhood. He walked toward his parked car near the corner of 25th Avenue and Moraga Street, fishing for his keys. It was an ordinary scene on an ordinary block of squat pastel row houses. Then a white van screeched around the corner, and blasts shattered the stillness. 4 rounds struck the man at nearly point-blank range. He was dead before he hit the pavement. Though he carried a loaded revolver in his jacket, he never had a chance to reach for it. When police arrived, they quickly discovered that while Joseph Donati officially existed, this was a well-established alias. The dead man was Joseph Barboza, one of the most feared hitmen in American organized crime, and the first person to die after entering the Federal Witness Protection Program. To understand how Barboza ended up bleeding out on a San Francisco sidewalk, we've got to go back to the beginning. He was born on September 20th, 1932, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to Portuguese immigrant parents. His father was a middleweight boxer who eventually abandoned the family, leaving Barboza's mother, a seamstress, to raise 4 children alone. That departure when Joe was around 12 seemed to light a fuse that never went out. Joe was getting arrested before he'd finished his teenage years and was shipped off to the Lyman School for Boys, a so-called reform institution that served as a finishing school for criminals. By 18, he'd been sentenced to 5 years at the Massachusetts Correctional Institution in Concord. While there, he led a wild prison break in 1953. He and 6 other inmates overpowered 4 guards and fled in stolen cars, only to be recaptured within 24 hours. Like his father, Barboza tried boxing, fighting as a light heavyweight under the name The Baron. He won 8 of roughly 11 professional bouts, 5 by knockout, but legitimate athletics couldn't contain his appetite for violence. He drifted between jobs as a longshoreman and a fruit store clerk, always circling back to crime. After his parole in 1958, he became a fixture in East Boston's underworld, holding court at a bar on Bennington Street that locals called Barboza's Corner. The nickname that would follow Barboza to his grave originated during an incident at a nightclub frequented by Patriarca crime family members. When an older patron complained about Barboza's behavior, Barboza slapped the man across the face. Patriarca underboss Henry Tamaleo, seated nearby, angrily ordered Barboza never to touch anyone with his hands again. Without missing a beat, Barboza leaned over and bit the man's ear. Some accounts say he chewed off a piece of the man's cheek. Either way, he was now known as the Animal. Despite his Portuguese heritage, Barboza rose to become one of the most prolific hitmen for Raymond Patriarca's New England crime family during the 1960s. He's believed to have slain as many as 26 people, though that number has never been verified. However, he needed a way to generate income between big hits, and given his close ties with the Patriarca crime family, he had free rein to conduct his business. His crew operated across Boston, generating substantial income through loan sharking and generalized intimidation. However, by 1966, Barboza's position had become dangerously unstable. He'd been shot at outside his Chelsea home and wasn't following the traditional rules of the mob. He tried shaking down a nightclub already paying protection to the Patriarca underboss in Boston. That recklessness made him a target from all sides. While it was never confirmed with certainty that a contract was put out on him by his own people, he certainly believed this was the case. Everything changed in 1967 when Barboza was jailed on federal weapons charges. Federal agents reinforced the idea that he had a contract on his head and that his former friends had turned foe. Given that he wasn't safe on the streets or in prison, the agents convinced him that it was time to turn on everyone he worked for, and in exchange, he could enter witness protection. And just to be clear here, by turn on the other mob guys, I mean testify against them, in case anyone was wondering about my phrasing there. He testified against Raymond Patriarca himself, helping secure an indictment for conspiracy to eliminate bookies in New England. But the most consequential and ultimately most damaging chapter of Barbosa's cooperation involved the 1965 slaying of small-time criminal Teddy Deegan. Barbosa took the stand and named 6 men as participants in Deegan's hit. After 50 days of testimony, the jury convicted all 6. 4 received death sentences, and 2 others got life in prison. The problem was that at least 4 of those men were completely innocent. Barbosa had lied under oath, implicating them based on personal grudges and at the encouragement of his handlers. The actual perpetrators included Barbosa himself and Vincent Flemmi, who happened to be a valuable informant the FBI wanted to protect. Interestingly, the wrongly accused men spent a combined total of over 100 years in prison, with the state government eventually paying out over $100 million to their families. But that wouldn't come out until long after Barbosa's death, and for the time being, he had fulfilled his end of the bargain. After his testimony, Barbosa was relocated to Santa Rosa, California, under a new identity. The government enrolled him in culinary school, leveraging his genuine talent as a cook who specialized in Portuguese delicacies. But Barbosa couldn't stay out of trouble. In the summer of 1970, he eliminated a small-time criminal named Clay Wilson during a dispute over stolen goods. He shot Wilson while the two were out walking with 2 women, then hid the body under a tree stump. When arrested, Barbosa essentially blackmailed the government by threatening to recant his Boston testimony. He told the local detectives that he was actually in witness protection and that he had made up large parts of the story that took a bite out of the New England mob. But then he also told them that he had implicated people based on who the FBI told him to target, prompting FBI agents to rush to California and serve as character witnesses at his trial. With numerous federal agents willing to stake their careers on what a great guy Barbosa really was, and with potential federal pressure, he was offered a sweetheart deal. Ultimately, Barbosa was sentenced to 5 years at Folsom Prison, where he wrote poetry about the mob and about his crimes. He was paroled in October 1975 and given yet another identity, this time as Joseph Donati. He moved into a cheap apartment near Ocean Beach in San Francisco and got a job as a cook at a restaurant near City Hall. The FBI maintained loose surveillance, but Barbosa had essentially stopped hiding, and he just couldn't stay away from illicit activities. He harbored ambitions of filling what he perceived as a leadership void in San Francisco's organized crime scene. That ambition led him to reconnect with James Chalmers, a small-time South Boston hoodlum. The two met regularly to discuss criminal schemes. What Barbosa didn't know was that Chalmers was working a criminal scheme already, and Barbosa wasn't to be a partner, but the target. He was actively betraying him, confirming all details before tipping off members of the New England Mafia about his location. While it's never been confirmed with any absolute certainty, federal agents later caught members of the Mafia talk about what happened to Barbosa. According to these recordings, they dispatched 2 top-level enforcers to San Francisco to handle the matter personally. If the recordings are to be believed, the Mafia thought this was so important that they had 2 made men complete the hit themselves. According to the recordings, they watched and waited, since everything had to be perfect, as they knew that they would only get 1 shot. On that February evening, as Barbosa left Chalmers' apartment and approached his car, a white van rolled up fast, and shots fired, cutting him down. Barbosa was 43 years old. Interestingly, in a statement given by Barbosa's attorney about the slaying, he said that society had suffered no great loss, a remarkably candid statement. Despite the recordings, no one was ever charged in relation to his death, and some conspiracy-minded individuals have speculated that the FBI essentially let it happen. Some have speculated that no one was ever prosecuted for the crime, despite the evidence, because it would have exposed the unethical activities of the agents assigned to his case. Not only that, the prosecution may have caused all the convictions against members of the New England Mafia to fall apart, leading to numerous organized crime figures being released. Though there's no direct proof of this, he was a man that held tremendous ability to personally blackmail numerous agents who had worked on his case. Joseph Barboza left behind a deeply troubling legacy. He was a vicious predator who terrorized New England's underworld for the better part of a decade. He was also a cooperating witness whose perjured testimony destroyed the lives of innocent men and their families for over 3 decades. And he was, in many ways, a pawn of an FBI willing to sacrifice justice in its conflict against organized crime. It was the night of December 12, 1976, when 19-year-old Paul Fox vanished without a trace from Long Beach, California. That day, he had helped set the table for a family dinner and then hurried out to meet friends, even leaving his wallet behind in his rush. Paul hopped into a car outside his home, expecting to return soon, but he never came back, and in fact, he was never seen again. Paul was the youngest of 4 brothers in a family of Hungarian immigrants. His parents, Paul Sr. and Elizabeth, had fled Soviet-occupied Hungary in the 1950s and built a new life in California. By 1976, the family lived in Long Beach, and young Paul, as they affectionately called him, was a recent high school graduate figuring out his future. He was working as a valet while he tried to figure out what the next steps he wanted to take in his life were. At 6 feet 3 inches tall with a light brown mustache, Paul was imposing, but also described as shy and polite. He was a talented artist and even handy around the house, and he could cook and sew his own clothes, a fact that his mother was very proud of. Most importantly, Paul was devoted to his family. He never left home without telling his mom where he was going and when he'd be back. Sometimes he would leave a note saying, for example, he was at a friend's house and would return in a few minutes. This responsible behavior made his sudden disappearance all the more baffling to his parents and brothers. On Sunday, December 12, 1976, after eating an early supper at home, Paul headed out to meet friends at a local nightclub called Ripple's Bar in Long Beach. Ripple's was a popular spot on the waterfront, known as a gay-friendly dance bar. According to witnesses, Paul was seen at the club chatting with an unknown man, described as a strange man, not recognizable to his usual friend group. This would later turn out to be a critical clue. When midnight passed and Paul hadn't returned home, his family grew concerned. They discovered he had left behind his wallet and identification, which was very unlike him. By the next morning, the family reported Paul missing to the police and began searching for him in every way they knew how. Paul's family called all his friends and acquaintances, hoping someone had seen him after the club. They drove around Long Beach, checking his usual hangouts and even local hospitals, but there was no sign of Paul. When they pressed the Long Beach police for help, however, they were met with a frustrating response. And I bet I don't even have to say what that response was. But hey, if you're new to the genre, the cops told his family he was a runaway and told him he'd turn up soon. Being 19, Paul was legally an adult, and police noted that he had a pending misdemeanor charge for underage drinking and had missed a recent court appearance for it. To them, it may have been plausible that he might have taken off on his own to avoid that court date. His family emphatically rejected that idea. Paul had left on good terms, even setting the dinner table before going out, hardly something a plotting runaway would do. The family pleaded with authorities, insisting that Paul would never disappear voluntarily without contacting them. For days that turned into weeks, the family plastered missing person flyers around town and called the police regularly, trying to keep the case alive. But with no solid leads, their private investigation stalled. Months went by with no news. At some point after he disappeared, it does appear that the authorities started to take his case more seriously. But at that point, of course, valuable time had been lost. Periodically, the family endured terrible scares. Whenever an unidentified body was found that even loosely matched Paul's description, the authorities reached out. Officials would ask if Paul had a chipped tooth or inquire about his height, while the family's hearts pounded with anxiety, but it was never him. Over the years, Paul's parents chased every fleeting lead. In one instance, Paul's father learned of a crewman on a ship docked in Long Beach who happened to share his son's name. For a moment, they hoped Paul might turn up alive working on a boat. They tracked down that lead, only to find it was another man entirely. As time went on, Elizabeth was overcome with grief. Neighbors recalled that she cried every day, unable to find closure while her son was missing. Paul struggled as well, often having to leave the room when his wife broke down, because he had no words left to comfort her. In 1983, nearly 7 years after Paul disappeared, detectives from Orange County finally gave the Fox family a chilling update that they definitely didn't want to hear. They believed Paul had fallen victim to a serial predator who was active in Southern California, Randy Kraft. Kraft had been arrested that year and linked to a spree of brutal slayings of young men in the 1970s and early 1980s. There were several reasons investigators suspected a connection. Kraft was known to frequent Ripple's Bar in Long Beach, the very place where Paul was last seen. In fact, witnesses from 1976 later realized that the stranger spotted with Paul that night strongly resembled Randy Kraft. Even more damning, when police searched Kraft's car after his arrest, they found a handwritten list, a coded quote-unquote scorecard of his presumed victims. On this list was the entry named Ripples alongside an obscene phrase. Investigators interpreted that obscenity as a likely code name for Paul, given how it resembled Paul's last name. Essentially, Kraft's own records hinted that he picked up a victim from Ripples and used a crude nickname that pointed to Paul's case. And this is the point where I should probably mention that I'm not quite sure Fox is the correct pronunciation of his last name, but I'm going with it because we're on YouTube. By the fall of 1983, they informed Paul's parents that he could have been one of Randy Kraft's many unnamed victims. However, one officer quietly told them not to hold out hope that Paul was still alive or to keep any hope of a prosecution, since they definitely didn't have the evidence to prove it. It was a devastating revelation, marking the end of years of uncertainty with a worst-case conclusion. It also meant that if Paul wasn't the one that was targeted by Kraft, the cops had essentially treated his case as closed anyway and wouldn't be working it further. Randy Kraft eventually stood trial and was convicted in 1989 of 16 slayings, for which he was condemned. Paul's case was never officially included in the charges because there was no physical evidence like a body to present, but he was listed by law enforcement as a likely victim. To this day, Kraft maintains his innocence in all crimes and has never revealed what truly became of Paul's body. He remains locked up in California, his date with the big DP from the government indefinitely put on hold. Nearly 5 decades have passed since that fateful night in 1976, and Paul's fate is still not definitively known. His body has never been found, and his parents never got to properly say goodbye, going to their graves without knowing the absolute truth of what happened. For Karen and Michael Laspizza, the morning of August 30th, 2013, began with a knock at the door and devastating news. Instead of welcoming their 19-year-old son Bryce home from college, they faced a California Highway Patrol officer who informed them that Bryce's SUV had been found crashed. It was near Castaic Lake with his phone, laptop, and wallet inside, but there was no sign of Bryce himself. Bryce was a sophomore at Sierra College in Northern California. In the 2 weeks before his disappearance, those close to him noticed alarming changes in his behavior. Normally outgoing and friendly, he became withdrawn, erratic, and depressed. Bryce's roommate, Sean Dixon, observed that Bryce had started drinking heavily and taking the stimulant medication Vyvanse without a prescription. He even gave away some of his prized possessions, including his Xbox console and a pair of sentimental diamond earrings. These uncharacteristic actions set off massive alarm bells among his friends and family. On August 27, 2013, Bryce's behavior took another strange turn. He abruptly broke up with his longtime girlfriend, Kim Sly, telling her she would be better off without him. That same day, he sent an emotional text to Sean, thanking him for being a great friend and implying that Sean had saved his soul. This dramatic, farewell-like message was entirely out of character and left his friends concerned. Despite these red flags, Bryce insisted he was fine and planned to drive home to his parents. On the night of August 28th, he visited Kim at her apartment in Chico one last time. Kim grew so worried about Bryce's state that she took away his car keys to stop him from driving. Bryce called his mother for help. Karen offered to fly up to Northern California the next day if Bryce needed support. He told her not to worry and said he had, quote, a lot to talk about with her, but that he would do it later and not over the phone. Relieved that Bryce seemed calm, Karen then instructed Kim to return Bryce's keys, a decision that would prove fateful. Around 11:30 p.m., Bryce left Kim's apartment and began the long drive south toward his family's home in Laguna Niguel. By the morning of August 29th, Bryce had barely made any progress toward home. At 11 o'clock that morning, his parents learned that he had used their roadside assistance service after running out of gas near a town called Button Willow. This was roughly halfway between Chico and Laguna Niguel. A mechanic named Christian delivered fuel to Bryce's stranded Toyota Highlander. Before he got the assistance call, he had noticed that Bryce had been sitting in the same spot for several hours without moving on. Even then, Bryce didn't arrive as expected. As evening fell with no sign of their son, the family filed a missing person report. Police tracked Bryce's cell phone signal and discovered he was still in the Button Willow area late that night. Officers found Bryce in his car by the roadside, not far from where he had gotten gas. He was awake and showed no signs of intoxication. When asked why he was still there, Bryce said he was just taking some time after some heavy personal events. Since he seemed fine and was doing nothing illegal, the officers let him go after he promised to head straight home and call his parents. Around 10 that evening, Bryce finally resumed his journey south on Interstate 5. A few hours later, in the early morning darkness of August 30th, Bryce made one final phone call. At 2:08, he spoke to his mom and said he was too tired to continue driving and would pull off to sleep in his car for a while. That was the last time anyone heard from him. Surveillance footage later showed that instead of stopping to rest, Bryce's SUV exited I-5 near Castaic Lake at around 2:15. Another camera sighting around 4:30 suggested he was still in that area more than 2 hours later. What happened over the next couple of hours remains unknown. Sometime before dawn, California Highway Patrol officers found Bryce's Toyota Highlander crashed down a 15-foot embankment off an access road by the lake. The SUV was on its side with a shattered back window. Inside the wreck, officers found Bryce's phone, laptop, wallet, and clothes, but no Bryce. There was no blood or any sign of injury at the scene. It appeared Bryce had escaped the crash unharmed and then disappeared into the night. The discovery of Bryce's abandoned car prompted an extensive search around Castaic Lake. Divers scoured the lake but found no trace of him. On land, bloodhounds picked up Bryce's scent and followed it from the crash site to a truck stop on the other side of the dam, where the trail abruptly ended. This suggested that Bryce left the area on foot and possibly caught a ride from that truck stop, essentially vanishing without a trace. Days later, on September 4th, firefighters responding to a brush fire near Castaic Lake discovered a burned body close to where Bryce's vehicle had been found, raising fears that it was him. However, the coroner confirmed that the body belonged to an unrelated individual and not to Bryce. Despite exhaustive searches by authorities and volunteers, to this day no sign of Bryce Laspisa has ever been found. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed to explain Bryce's baffling disappearance. One possibility is that Bryce intended to end himself. His erratic behavior, sudden breakup, and cryptic goodbyes could indicate this intent. Yet the complete lack of a body makes this theory inconclusive, especially since he was on foot, and there's also the matter of the bloodhound evidence. Another theory is that Bryce survived the crash, but suffered a head injury or psychological break that left him disoriented. In that state, he might have wandered away and succumbed to the elements or gotten lost. Still, if he had stayed nearby, search teams likely would have found him. The fact that bloodhounds tracked his scent to a truck stop suggests an alternate scenario. Bryce may have intentionally walked away to start a new life. If he caught a ride from that truck stop, he could be anywhere, potentially living under a different identity. His decision to leave behind his phone and wallet might indicate he didn't want to be tracked, or it could simply mean he wasn't thinking clearly. Personally, though, I have to speculate that he may have met with foul play at that truck stop. He may have gotten in the wrong truck and met up with a driver who had some pretty serious ill intentions. But the thing is, this hypothesis doesn't require the initial driver who picked him up to have been a bad guy. That driver could have simply taken him to a different truck stop far away where he may have run into trouble. This is made doubly more difficult because he could have run into numerous Good Samaritan drivers in multiple states before running into a predator. More than a decade has passed since Bryce vanished, and his fate is still a complete mystery. Given the lack of evidence as it currently stands, his parents continue to hold on to hope that Bryce may still be out there somewhere. It was October 12, 1944, when West Hollywood's upscale El Palacio apartments awoke to horror. A maid discovered 20-year-old oil heiress Georgette Bauerdorf lifeless in her bathtub. The bathwater was tinted pink with blood, and Georgette was half submerged and unresponsive. The cops arrived and quickly determined she was the victim of foul play. This shocking crime scene marked the beginning of a Hollywood mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Georgette was born into privilege but yearned to contribute on the home front as the world had become engulfed in conflict. After her family moved from New York to Los Angeles, she graduated from a prestigious girls' school and embraced volunteer work. By 1944, the young heiress was serving as a junior hostess at the Hollywood Canteen, a famous club where movie stars entertained American servicemen on leave. For Georgette, being a canteen hostess was both an honor and a thrill. The nightclub was co-founded by Hollywood heavy hitter Bette Davis and offered GIs food and fun. Georgette's friendly charm and generosity made her a favorite among the troops. She was known to offer weary servicemen a place to sleep at her apartment, letting them crash on her downstairs sofa while she stayed upstairs. Her friends adored her spirit, though some worried she was too trusting with strangers during these tumultuous times. On the evening of October 11, 1944, Georgette reported for her usual Wednesday night shift at the Hollywood Canteen, greeting and dancing with servicemen as always. That night, a particularly persistent soldier kept asking her to jitterbug, a dance she disliked. but she politely deflected his requests and continued her hostess duties. Around 11:30 p.m., Georgette left the canteen and drove home alone in her black coupe. She had mentioned to at least one friend that she was expecting a late-night phone call from her boyfriend, a soldier in Texas, and needed to be home for it. In fact, she had recently purchased a plane ticket and planned to fly to El Paso soon to visit this sweetheart, a trip she would never take. Investigators later deduced that Georgette arrived at her West Hollywood apartment around midnight. An open can of green string beans and melon rinds in her trash suggested she fixed a quick snack before bed. She then changed into pajamas and perhaps began writing in her diary or reading in bed. A diary and newspaper were found open in her room, implying she was winding down for the night. At roughly 2:30 that morning, a neighbor was jolted awake by a chilling scream echoing through the building. He heard a woman crying out and pleading before the voice was suddenly silenced. Thinking it might have been a lover's quarrel that ended quickly, or perhaps even something highly spicy, the neighbor went back to sleep. When Georgette's maid, Lulu Atwood, arrived the next morning, she found the apartment door wide open and water running in the bathroom. Georgette's body was face down in an overflowing tub, wearing only her pajama top. Police at first considered the possibility of an accidental drowning, but the evidence quickly proved otherwise. The light bulb over the outside entrance had been carefully unscrewed just enough to disable it, plunging the doorway into darkness. This pointed to a calculated attack, and police suspected the perp may have entered earlier using a key and lain in wait, ambushing her once she was home. Inside, Georgette's knuckles were bruised and there were deep marks on her head and abdomen, indicating she had put up a fierce fight. The coroner found that she had been brutally assaulted and strangled. A strip of cloth had been viciously shoved down her throat to asphyxiate her. Further testing revealed that it was an unusual type of medical bandage rarely seen in America, leading to speculation her attacker was a serviceman who had acquired it overseas. Notably, there was no water in her lungs, meaning Georgette was already dead before the tub was filled. Other clues perplexed investigators. Georgette's valuable jewelry and money were left largely untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. Only about $100 was missing from her purse, even though far greater sums of cash and jewels were in plain view. And I'm not talking about regular jewels here. This is oil baroness stuff after all. Her car was gone from the garage, and it was soon found abandoned miles away, out of gas and sporting a fresh dent on one fender. Fingerprints were lifted from the vehicle and from inside, but they matched no one in law enforcement records. Investigators also found cigarette butts on the floor of Georgette's home, an eerie discovery given that she didn't smoke. This led detectives to speculate that he may have stayed after, smoking while taking in the deed he had just committed. News of the glamorous young woman's slaying made headlines around the nation, and a task force of Los Angeles sheriff's detectives and military police sprang into action. Because of Georgette's role at the canteen, dozens of soldiers she had met were investigated. Police eliminated many potential suspects by checking military logs. Any enlisted man absent overnight without leave was scrutinized, and most were accounted for. Some of the men were targeted by investigators in a more direct way for their connection or perceived ties to Georgette. The pushy patron from the canteen was tracked down and quickly cleared. He had been signed into his barracks at the time the attack went down. Detectives also tracked a very tall soldier who Georgette had briefly dated, as well as the army sergeant to whom she'd given a ride that night. Both men were questioned, but neither was ever tied to the crime. Leads continued to surface from all corners. One disturbed man in San Francisco actually confessed, but his story turned out to be false and attention-seeking. Another suspect, picked up for an unrelated slaying in Glendale, was briefly suspected but ultimately ruled out. Because Georgette often lost her keys and had multiple duplicates made, police considered whether someone had obtained a copy to access her apartment. As I mentioned, it's believed that someone had ambushed her in her apartment. Disturbingly, he likely stayed in hiding for a significant time while she was already home. Despite extensive interviews and the tantalizing evidence left behind, every promising lead led nowhere. Georgette's father, with the help of family friend William Randolph Hearst, even pressed authorities to solve the case swiftly to avoid scandal and gossip. Months passed with no arrest, and the trail grew cold. In the years that followed, the tragic story of Georgette Bauerdorf gradually faded from the headlines. It remains unclear if any forensic evidence from the scene was stored, though I assume that since forensic genetic testing was basically 5 decades away, it wouldn't have been. However, on the off chance the evidence remains in an evidence locker somewhere, there's a faint hope that one day this California unsolved mystery may be resolved. A chilling scream rang out on a quiet West Hollywood street in the early hours of February 12, 1977. Moments later, aspiring actress Krista Helm lay dying in front of her agent's home, stabbed dozens of times in a savage attack. The perp left no witnesses and few clues behind. Decades later, the question of who killed her and why remains one of Hollywood's most baffling unsolved mysteries of that era. Born in Milwaukee, Krista moved to New York and then Los Angeles chasing stardom, leaving behind a young daughter from a brief teenage marriage. Disturbingly, both parents effectively abandoned their daughter, though Krista promised to return at some point in the future. Needless to say, fate intervened and this promise would never be fulfilled. She landed some modeling gigs and a starring film role, a low-budget action movie called Let's Go for Broke in 1974. But the film flopped after a short run. Instead, Krista became better known as a quote-unquote socialite on the Hollywood party scene. She mingled with big names, reportedly dating NFL superstar Joe Namath, rock legend Mick Jagger, and even having some close encounters with the Shah of Iran. Ambitious and charismatic, Krista made friends in high places and enjoyed the trappings of wealth, without any real known source of income. Privately, Krista also kept a secret diary where she documented her intimate encounters, complete with candid details and a rating system for her lovers. Allegations made in the years following her death even claimed that she was working as an escort to the rich and powerful. I do have to include a disclaimer here and mention that these are just allegations, though I'm sure my description of her lifestyle may have already have had some of you thinking this. By 1977, with her career stalled and money running low, she whispered about turning her diary into fat stacks with a tell-all book. If the rumors are to be believed, she had some seriously compromising material about some sick puppies in high places, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Late on February 11th, 1977, Krista left a party in Los Angeles and drove to meet her agent at his West Hollywood home. She arrived around 1:30 a.m., but before she could reach the door, an unknown assailant ambushed her on the quiet residential street. The attacker stabbed Krista repeatedly with a knife and also struck her with a blunt object, leaving her collapsed in a pool of blood next to the curb. A passerby soon discovered her body and rushed to get help. By the time police arrived, however, Krista had already succumbed to her injuries at just 27 years old. Some reports said she was still clutching her car keys, suggesting the attacker struck the instant she stepped out of her vehicle. Neighbors later recalled hearing a single terrifying scream during the night of the attack, but no one witnessed the attacker. When investigators surveyed the scene, they realized that Krista's purse was missing, and with it, her infamous diary. Its disappearance led police to suspect that the attacker's primary motive was to take or destroy that tell-all journal. If someone feared what Krista had written, stealing the diary would eliminate the threat. Detectives also learned that Krista had allegedly sometimes tape-recorded her spicy encounters, but those audio tapes were nowhere to be found either. The vanishing of these personal items robbed investigators of crucial evidence, and strongly suggested that someone wanted Krista's secrets to die with her. With Krista's tumultuous love life and high-profile connections, the list of potential suspects was long. Investigators theorized that an ex-lover might have had a personal motive to silence her, especially if they knew about her diary and feared exposure. Given that Krista was struggling financially, she had every incentive to monetize her secrets, which could have alarmed anyone with something to hide. Over time, more clues have added to the intrigue. Krista's friends later recalled that she seemed fearful in her final days. In fact, a few months before the slaying, she sent a postcard to a close friend saying she was in over her head and might need to disappear for a while. This alarming message suggests Krista sensed danger looming. Notably, decades later, it was claimed that she was part of an elite escort operation, which some have speculated had ties to intelligence. This raised the distinct possibility she was eliminated because she knew too much about powerful people, even if they didn't know about her secret diary. In 2005, her daughter persuaded the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to reopen the cold case for a fresh investigation. A team of detectives pored over the old evidence and tracked down witnesses who had never spoken. They uncovered a few new leads, including the discovery that Krista's close friend allegedly sent an acquaintance to clean out her apartment right after the attack. It's believed that the tapes, her illicit diary, and other personal items were removed during this process. When questioned by the authorities, the individual who allegedly orchestrated this claimed that he didn't really remember Krista and offered no information whatsoever. And for my Sopranos fans out there, according to a report by CBS News in 2008, the man who actually did the removal was allegedly Tony Sirico, who played Paulie Walnuts. I always thought he was just a good actor, but after browsing his Wikipedia article, it seems like he may have been bringing some serious life experience to the role. I don't have any evidence to directly prove it, but I can virtually guarantee that Krista wasn't taken out at random. She talked about publishing a tell-all book at a moment when her diary allegedly named celebrities, political figures, and embattled foreign royalty. She was also making audio recordings of herself with influential and powerful men, for reasons which remain unclear. It's not hard to see how someone rich and powerful would have seen her as a liability who needed to be handled. To back this up, within hours of her slaying, the items that could damage reputations vanished into the ether, never to resurface. Her apparent fear in the months before her death, including the postcard hinting she might need to disappear, adds to the sense that pressure was building. I also find it weird how her so-called friend, someone who had apparent access to her house, claimed to barely remember her decades later. But hey, maybe it was all completely random. Stranger things have happened after all. On July 18, 1980, a grisly discovery shattered the peace at a California high school. At Westlake High School in Thousand Oaks, maintenance workers found the body of a young woman dumped near the parking lot. She lay on a dirt slope by the football field, clad in a white t-shirt and red pants, with black high-heeled shoes tossed into the nearby brush. Evidence on the concrete suggested she had been slain elsewhere and dragged to that spot. It was July 18, 1980, the beginning of a haunting mystery surrounding an unidentified victim, now known only as the Ventura County Jane Doe. Police determined the victim was a petite young woman of Hispanic and/or Native American heritage. Tragically, She was about 4 to 5 months pregnant when she was slain, and evidence showed that she had given birth at least once prior. An autopsy showed that she had been subject to an indecent assault before the attacker finished her off. Bruises and defensive cuts on her arms and hands told investigators that she fought her attacker fiercely, doing everything she could to survive in those moments. Investigators faced an immediate challenge. Without an identity for the victim, leads were scarce. They canvassed the area for witnesses, and a motorist reported seeing a woman who matched the victim's description hitchhiking near a freeway the night before. This raised a theory that the Jane Doe might have been a hitchhiker or traveler picked up by the perpetrator. However, that tip led nowhere conclusive. The crime scene itself, a school parking area in a suburb, revealed no personal belongings or identification. By the end of 1980, the trail had gone cold and would remain that way for decades. In 2012, detectives revisiting the cold case turned to DNA. The perpetrator had left traces of himself, notably foreign DNA under the victim's fingernails from her desperate struggle. Modern forensic testing yielded a DNA profile of an unknown male, which was uploaded to the National CODIS database. In 2013, the cold case got a huge break when the evidence matched an inmate in a California prison, Wilson Chust. While he had never been on the cops' radar, Chust was far from a random suspect. He was a convicted violent felon with a history of crimes involving abductions. In fact, records showed he had been paroled in June 1980, just weeks before the Jane Doe's slaying, and by September 1980, he was arrested again for unrelated crimes against women. The DNA hit linked Chust not only to the Ventura County Jane Doe, but also to another unsolved 1980 slaying of a young woman in Kern County. Notably, both women had significant indigenous ancestry, suggesting that this was part of his victim profile. In 2015, he was formally charged with the 1980 attacks, but despite overwhelming evidence, he denied any involvement, offering no information about the victims' identities. The case went to trial in 2018, 38 years after the crimes, and despite both women being unidentified, he was found guilty on both charges. In the years following, one of the women was identified as Shirley Souze, a Cree woman from Alberta in Canada. However, the Ventura County Jane Doe remained unidentified. In 2018, the Ventura County Sheriff's Office partnered with the DNA Doe Project. They extracted the victim's DNA and used it to search genealogy databases for family matches, and the results were intriguing. Her DNA pointed toward an indigenous Mexican or Central American background, which aligned with her physical traits and the initial anthropological assessment. Genetic genealogy soon linked the unknown woman to distant cousins. They traced family roots to Zacatecas, Mexico, and discovered very distant cousins who lived in the Los Angeles area. This strongly suggests that the Jane Doe or her immediate family may have come from that region and later settled in Southern California. A major development came in 2021 when genealogists managed to identify the father of the Jane Doe's unborn baby. He turned out to be a man from Honduras who had been living in Los Angeles around 1980. Detectives were able to locate and interview him, and he confirmed he had a relationship with a young woman around that time, but he didn't know her full identity. Unfortunately, he couldn't give much in the way of biographical details about her either, though he does appear to have confirmed that she wasn't born in America. Notably, the authorities don't believe he was involved in the Jane Doe's passing in any way whatsoever, and continue to believe the convicted perpetrator acted alone. Still, personally, I find it quite unusual that this man claims to have been in a relationship with this woman, yet couldn't even remember the most basic biographical details about her. I would expect that he would have at least been able to remember a first name, or where she was originally from, or anything rather than simply nothing. At any rate, all these clues have shaped working theories about who the Jane Doe was. She might have left home as a teenager or young adult, which could be why no immediate family reported her missing. The hitchhiking report supports the idea that she was transient or traveling when she crossed paths with Chust. It's possible her relatives back in Mexico or elsewhere didn't know where to start searching when she vanished. This has led to the speculative idea that there may be a parallel missing persons investigation in Mexico or elsewhere for this young woman. One of the most haunting aspects of the Ventura County Jane Doe case is that she wasn't just a pregnant woman when she was slain. She had also given birth to at least one child before her passing. The autopsy revealed evidence of a prior cesarean scar, which indicated that she delivered a child years earlier. That fact deepens the tragedy, but also provides investigators with a potential path forward. If that earlier child survived and is still alive today, they may carry the crucial genetic link that could finally unlock this Jane Doe's identity. After all, genetic genealogy thrives on locating close relatives, and a direct descendant represents the most definitive match. It was a warm spring evening in rural Winton, California, a golden early summer night with the sun still lingering in the sky. 15-year-old Vanessa Dawn Smith stepped out of her house for her usual evening walk, a routine she often shared with her mother. But on May 31st, 1997, Vanessa went out alone, carrying the simple walking stick she liked to bring for a sense of security. She promised to be back before dark. Her mother watched as Vanessa headed down Winton Way toward the nearby almond orchards, not realizing it would be the last time she saw her daughter. Vanessa was a shy 15-year-old growing up in a close-knit Mennonite family in Winton. She loved spending time with her family and church. Almost every night, she and her mother Beverly would take a walk together through their rural neighborhood. The night Vanessa vanished was one of the few times she went walking alone, simply because her mom was busy with chores after dinner. The very day she disappeared, Vanessa had enjoyed a school picnic celebrating the end of the year. After the picnic, Vanessa had dinner with her parents and then wanted to go on her regular walk. Eager to be outdoors, Vanessa told her mom she would take a short walk by herself and be back before sunset. Around 7 p.m., she headed out along Winton Way and then turned onto Mercedes Avenue to make her usual loop through the orchards back home. It was broad daylight in their quiet neighborhood, and the route was peaceful and familiar. It was a rural road, lined with orchards and the occasional farmhouse, not a place where anyone imagined danger lurking. When dusk arrived and Vanessa still hadn't returned, her parents knew something was wrong. Art and Beverly Smith rushed out to search the route. As they neared a bend in the road, their hearts dropped. On the roadside lay Vanessa's wooden walking stick. They shouted her name into the empty dusk, but no answer came. The Smiths immediately called the Merced County Sheriff's Department, and thankfully they didn't simply dismiss her as a runaway. Officers and neighbors joined the search, combing the area with flashlights into the night, but no additional clues turned up. No neighbors heard screams or saw any suspicious vehicle. The community was left shaken and baffled, and authorities had little to go on beyond the fact that foul play was almost certain. All that remained was that lonely walking stick, a silent, inanimate witness to whatever had happened to her. Investigators treated Vanessa's disappearance as an abduction from the very start. They did consider the chance of a random stranger attack, but the circumstances seemed to point to someone she knew. Those close to Vanessa noted that she would have been unlikely to willingly get into a stranger's car. It was more plausible that a familiar face had approached her. The Merced County Sheriff's Office stated that they believed Vanessa was likely abducted by an acquaintance, someone local who knew her routine. Detectives theorized that Vanessa might have let her guard down if a trusted person stopped to talk to her, giving the abductor a chance to grab her before she could react. Police looked at local offenders and suspicious characters, but found no links to Vanessa's case. No solid suspect ever emerged in the initial investigation, and despite extensive searches and interviews, the trail went cold. A possible break in the case finally came decades later when in 2019, an elderly Winton couple came forward with new information. Around 7 p.m., on the night Vanessa vanished, they saw a teenage girl with a walking stick on Mercedes Avenue, almost certainly Vanessa. More importantly, on their way home via a different road, they witnessed an incident they described as suspicious that same evening. They admitted fear kept them silent until then, but they ultimately gave a detailed statement to authorities. While the specifics remain confidential, investigators say this late testimony supports the theory that a local individual was involved and gives hope that the case can still be solved. Armed with this information, the sheriff's department renewed its commitment to cracking the case. To this day, the question of who took Vanessa and why still haunts Winton. Investigators suspect that someone in the community knows the truth, and they have repeatedly urged anyone with information to come forward. In the years since Vanessa disappeared, her story has been kept alive by her loved ones and the community. The case was featured on America's Most Wanted and is periodically revisited by local media on anniversaries. The case is still open, and authorities continue to urge tips from the public, and they insist the case isn't closed and say they'll continue investigating until Vanessa is found. Notably, a $50,000 reward is on offer for information leading to a resolution. One of the more unsettling theories surrounding Vanessa Dawn Smith's disappearance centers on the idea that someone in the local community knows exactly what happened. And this isn't just my crazy speculative theory, since we actually have strong circumstantial evidence to suggest that this could be the case. When that elderly couple came forward with information they had withheld for 22 years, they mentioned that fear was a major factor in not initially coming forward. This couple may just be incredibly cowardly, since we don't know all the details. However, the idea is chilling, that someone so dangerous, so deeply feared, could scare witnesses into silence for such a serious crime. Thanksgiving 1963 was a somber holiday in America. 1 week earlier, President John F. Kennedy had been brutally cut down in Dallas, plunging the nation into mourning. But in the early hours of that Thanksgiving, another tragedy was unfolding in Hollywood. Karen Kupkinette, a 22-year-old aspiring actress and daughter of a famous Chicago columnist, was living out the final moments of her life. Days later, she would be found dead in her West Hollywood apartment. The shocking death of this young starlet not only devastated her family, but soon became entangled in the web of JFK conspiracy theories. Karen Kupkinette grew up in the glow of show business. Born in 1941 to Irv and Essie Kupkinette, she was nicknamed Cookie and groomed for a life in the spotlight. Her father was a well-known Chicago newspaper columnist and TV personality, so Karen had connections that opened doors in entertainment. By her late teens, she had trained at the Actors Studio in New York and moved to Hollywood to chase her acting dreams. With her good looks and smoldering charisma, Karen showed promise. She earned rave reviews for a stage role in The Miracle Worker and was touted as an actress to watch in 1962. She landed small parts on popular TV shows like Perry Mason and The Donna Reed Show, and even a regular role on a forgettable sitcom called Mrs. G Goes to College. By all accounts, she seemed poised for stardom, or at least some level of acclaim. Behind the scenes, however, Karen's life was more turbulent. She struggled with personal insecurities including a long battle with weight and reliance on diet pills encouraged by her image-conscious mother. In Hollywood, Karen became involved with actor Andrew Prine, whom she met while guest starring on his TV series in late 1962. The romance was intense but rocky. Karen yearned for commitment, while Prine, recently divorced, wanted to keep things casual. This mismatch led to repeated heartbreak for Karen. In mid-1963, she became pregnant and, with help from friends, terminated the pregnancy, a traumatic event that only heightened the strain between her and Prine. Desperate to hold on to the relationship, Karen began exhibiting erratic behavior. She anonymously sent threatening cut-and-paste letters to Prine and even to herself, bizarre messages made of magazine letters, in an attempt to scare her ex into paying attention. After her death, investigators discovered Karen's fingerprints on those notes, confirming she had crafted them herself. She also resorted to spying on Prine and his new girlfriend. At one point, she noted in her diary that she was watching him from behind a hedge in anguish. The emotional toll was immense, and Karen's friends observed her increasing use of substances to cope. A shoplifting arrest in 1962 hinted at her distress, and by November 1963 she seemed to be teetering on the edge. On November 27, 1963, the day before Thanksgiving, Karen's friends tried to keep her company, unaware it would be her last night alive. That evening, she joined actor Mark Goddard and his wife Marcia for dinner in Beverly Hills. Karen arrived nearly an hour late, appearing disoriented and acting strangely. Her speech slurred, her head lolling as if she were on some kind of medication. After the uneasy dinner, Karen returned to her West Hollywood apartment. Around 9:30 p.m., two more friends, writer Edward Rubin and actor Robert Hathaway, stopped by her place to watch television together. They noted nothing obviously amiss beyond Karen seeming extremely tired and worn out. By 11:15 p.m., Karen said she was going to bed, so Rubin and Hathaway let themselves out, even locking the door behind them as they left her apartment that night. Nobody heard from Karen over the next 2 days. Given her emotional state, some friends initially assumed she might just be laying low. By Saturday, November 30th, concern grew, and whispers began that she may have done something to herself. The Goddards, uneasy that Karen hadn't been in touch since their dinner, went to check on her at her small bungalow apartment near the Sunset Strip. What they found was every friend's nightmare. The door was unlocked and a foul odor hung in the air. Inside, the apartment looked ransacked. A lamp was knocked over, a bowl of cigarettes and a coffee pot lay spilled on the floor, and cushions were askew. The television was still on, but muted. On the couch lay Karen's body, motionless. She had likely been dead for about 2 days, meaning she died sometime on Thanksgiving Day, 1963. Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department arrived and noted a few flecks of blood on Karen's face and a pillow, hinting at a struggle. The puzzling scene left even her close friends in shock. Given Karen's history of depression and pill use, some wondered if this was an overdose, or perhaps a tragic accident. However, the coroner's findings told a far more chilling story. During the autopsy, the medical examiner discovered Karen's hyoid bone, a small bone in the throat, was broken. This injury is a classic telltale sign of strangulation. With that evidence, Karen Kupkinet's death was officially ruled a slaying by strangling. The hunt for Karen's killer began under the glare of media attention. Here was a beautiful young actress slain in Hollywood, at the very moment the country was distracted by President Kennedy's assassination. Detectives initially pursued any lead they could find. There was no sign of forced entry at her apartment, raising the likelihood that Karen knew her attacker and had willingly let them in. The two friends who last saw her alive, Rubin and Hathaway, were questioned, and their timeline helped establish that Karen was alive late on the 27th. The focus then shifted to her tumultuous personal life for suspects. From the outset, police eyed Karen's ex-boyfriend, Andrew Prine, as a prime suspect. Prine had a clear motive in the eyes of investigators. Their relationship had ended badly. Karen had been reportedly harassing him and his new partner. Prine was in the Los Angeles area at the time, and Karen had been obsessed with him in the weeks leading up to her death. Not only that, but before her death, both Karen and Prine had reported receiving anonymous death threat letters. As mentioned earlier, the police later discovered they were fabricated by Karen herself. The revelation that she wrote those letters complicated the picture. It showed Karen's extreme desperation, but it also initially cast suspicion on Prine until the hoax was uncovered. Ultimately, though, Andrew Prine was never charged, and investigators couldn't find solid evidence tying him to the crime. He maintained his innocence, and in fact, Karen's parents eventually came to believe Prine was not responsible. Years later, the Kupkinets revealed that they harbored suspicions about another individual, though they never went public with this name. This indicates the family heard or deduced something pointing to a different culprit, but law enforcement never confirmed any alternate suspect publicly. As the investigation pressed on in 1963 and 1964, no arrest was made. Police looked into other possibilities, perhaps an enraged acquaintance, a jealous rival, or even a random intruder. The crime scene's disarray suggested a violent struggle, but some elements seemed strange. For instance, Karen's body was nude, which could imply a certain angle, yet there was little evidence reported of an indecent assault. Robbery didn't appear to be the motive either, as numerous valuable items in the apartment weren't taken. It was as if someone wanted to attack Karen personally. Her demise was the only goal. With scant physical evidence and many of Karen's closest friends cleared, the case grew cold. One reason the Karen Kupkinet case continues to fascinate is its curious timing. Karen died just 6 days after President Kennedy's assassination, leading some to wonder if there could be a connection. In the fevered atmosphere following JFK's slaying, a number of conspiracy theories sprouted, and Karen's name strangely found its way into that narrative. The most famous allegation comes from Penn Jones, a Texas newspaper editor and early JFK theorist. In his self-published 1966 book, Forgive My Grief, Jones claimed that Karen Kupkinet was the mysterious woman who tried to warn of Kennedy's assassination in advance. This claim centers on a real incident that occurred about 20 minutes before Kennedy was shot in Dallas. A telephone operator in Oxnard, California, reported that an unknown woman dialed her by mistake and whispered, "The president is going to be shot." According to the operator, the woman sounded disturbed or in a trance before the line went dead. This eerie phone call was noted by authorities, but never fully explained. Jones leapt on it and without evidence identified the woman on the phone as Karen Kupkinet. In his telling, Karen somehow knew of the assassination beforehand, perhaps through her Hollywood connections or via her father's network, and tried to alert authorities. Proponents of this idea argue that she was silenced by conspirators days later. It's a gripping story, but there is no concrete evidence to support it. Karen's friends and family have vehemently denied that she had any such foreknowledge or involvement. In fact, on November 22, 1963, Karen was reportedly not even in the Los Angeles area where the call originated. Additionally, Karen had no known connection to government or political insiders. The idea that she would be privy to one of the biggest secrets in world history is highly implausible, to say the least. Nonetheless, once her name was associated with that ominous phone call, it entered the lore of JFK conspiracy literature. Well over 60 years later, the story of Karen remains a somber footnote in Hollywood history and, oddly, in Kennedy lore.